Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert, covering a woke company getting sued for firing their established staff just to meet their diversity, equity, and inclusion quotas. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from the Washington Post, a newspaper giant tried to diversify its staff. White workers sued. The proposed class action lawsuit against Gannett is among a wave of recent cases claiming some corporate diversity policies disadvantage white employees. That is a very forgiving way of saying Gannett, like many other companies, are discriminating against certain employees because of their skin color to push an agenda. After more than 20 years of working for his hometown newspaper, the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester, New York, Steve Bradley was laid off amid pandemic-induced cost-cutting in May 2020. And that's what they claim. So I went and looked at his last article. His name is Steve Bradley. He was an editor there from the Democrat and Chronicle, which is one of the publications owned by Gannett. Gannett, you've probably heard of them before. They own USA Today. You've definitely heard of that, but they own a lot of other publications as well. Gannett publishes USA Today along with hundreds of local media outlets across the US and 120 media brands in the United Kingdom. They're a big company. Here's what Steve Bradley said May 1st, 2020, when he was laid off. Quote, "It's time to dust off that finance degree and get a real job." So he was basically ready to quit his entire editorial career because he thought his life was now worthless. He had no more place working in the business. He writes this: "Journalism professors and editors have been telling us writers not to, quote, bury the lead for decades, so I won't. Today is my last day at the Democrat and Chronicle. I have typed thousands of words during my 21 years working for the DNC, and those 10 are some of the most difficult. Not difficult because they were hard to spell, but because I enjoyed my time here so much that they aren't easy to read or say. Yet I'm sure that will come in time." Bradley was crushed, but he eventually took a communications job from a local school district. Then 2 years later, he received a startling message. Sitting in the bleachers at the school softball field in July 2022, Bradley took a phone call from an unknown number. He listed as J. Nelson Thomas, an employment lawyer he'd never met, presented a jarring claim. Bradley was laid off because he's white. Now, Bradley is one of 5 named plaintiffs in a proposed class action lawsuit that claims the country's largest newspaper publisher discriminated against non-minorities to achieve diversity goals. Filed in August in Virginia federal court, the suit alleges that Gannett fired white employees, denied them the opportunities for advancement, and replaced them with less qualified minority candidates as the company sought to diversify its workforce. You can't do that legally. The case is among the first to test the legality of corporate diversity practices in the wake of a June Supreme Court ruling that struck down affirmative action in college admissions. That decision has sparked a wave of litigation aimed at racial considerations in the workplace, including claims that corporate efforts to increase diversity have disadvantaged white employees. For Bradley, the decision to pursue legal action wasn't easy. He'd always thought it was good that Gannett was working to boost diversity, but he also wanted to be judged based on his work and the work of his team, he said, not his race. Quote, "Somebody needed to stand up to them," Bradley said in an interview. "To know that the decision was made because of how I look, I'm not okay with that." Well, this is the issue. Of course, companies should be hiring people based on merit, but you have to be careful because if their focus is going to be diversity, it's one thing to not give people the opportunity for a new job. It's another thing to just go out and fire people that spent 21 years giving work to the company. Yes, he was paid for his time, but obviously this is his whole career. 21 years at this company, and they just let him go to replace him with someone else because of his skin color? That's ridiculous. In a statement, Gannett declined to discuss the lawsuit, but said it always seeks to recruit and retain the most qualified individuals for all roles within the company. Quote, "We will vigorously defend our practice of ensuring equal opportunities for all of our valued employees against this meritless lawsuit," Holly Grunfeld-Sack, Gannett's chief legal counsel, said in an email. "Private employers have been barred for decades from making employment decisions based on race. Long-standing legal precedent has allowed companies to take targeted temporary steps to mitigate historic racial inequities in their workforces. But the recent ruling on college admissions suggests that it's no longer appropriate to be looking at someone's race for the benefit of diversity, said Devon Westhill, president and general counsel at the Center for Equal Opportunity, a conservative think tank. While the vast majority of Americans are in favor of equal opportunity, quote, the way in which it's practiced really is divisive, Westhill said. It foments resentment. In recent years, claims of race-based discrimination by white workers have made up only about 11% of charges submitted for review by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, according to data obtained by the Washington Post. But now, many legal experts expect those numbers to soar. Westhill said race-based employee affinity groups, fellowships, and grant programs exclusively for minorities are especially likely to face legal challenges, as are company policies that tie executive compensation to diversity targets. Can you imagine executives getting a portion of their pay tied to targets that are discriminatory? Hey, if they're not discriminatory, that's completely fine. But diversity targets, ESG targets, we see that in our ESG videos and research all the time here. Those targets are intended to promote racial and gender equity, which remains a struggle in corporate America. Women and people of color hold less than 14% of C-suite roles across Fortune 500 and S&P 500 companies, according to data from executive search firm Chris Coldler Associates. Last year, American women earned 82 cents for every dollar earned by white men, a gap that worsens for women of color, according to data from Pew Research Center. Leon Prieto, a professor of management at Clayton State University, said discrimination claims from white people often fail to acknowledge, quote, the historical context of workplace discrimination. Historically speaking, many corporate cultures have been rooted in biases that favor Americans of European descent over others, Prieto said. This has been well documented. Well, what does that have to do with his specific case? It has nothing to do with his case. The guy gave 21 years to working for this company. He seemed to be doing fine at the company. When the company laid him off, they claimed it was because of the pandemic, but it wasn't because of the pandemic. And yes, now he's part of a lawsuit because you can't do that to people. Whether or not people of this race or that race had this opportunity or that opportunity, what does it have to do with this guy? Absolutely nothing. This is his whole career. He's a real person. And firing one person or hiring another person is not going to right wrongs of inequity and opportunity. You can't change the culture just by being wildly discriminatory against certain races. It's not going to work. It's not legal. It doesn't happen in the United States of America, and people get away with it. They will not get away with that. Indeed, the earliest efforts to tackle racial disparities in the workforce began in the 1960s and 70s when companies used racial quotas to combat those biases in hiring. Such quotas were later deemed unconstitutional. Prieto said some companies will still overly emphasize racial diversity among new hires instead of taking the more modern view that, quote, DEI is not just about hiring ethnic minorities, it's about embracing all talent. Quote, a myopic focus on quotas doesn't really address inclusion efforts. In the wake of George Floyd's death, Gannett was among scores of corporate giants that made sweeping commitments to increase workforce diversity. The media juggernaut, which owns several hundred daily and weekly newspapers across the country, in addition to its flagship publication, USA Today, repeatedly expressed aims to, quote, reach racial and gender parity with the diversity of our nation, according to the lawsuit. Along with other goals, the company set a target of increasing the number of people of color in leadership positions by 30% by 2025. Gannett has yet to release its 2023 Inclusion Report, which offers an annual demographic breakdown of the company's newsrooms and progress towards its diversity goals. The most recent data on the company's workforce diversity page shows that Gannett Media's staff is nearly 70% white and 57% male. Black employees make up about 11.5% of staff members. Nearly 8% of employees are Hispanic, about 3% are Asian, and less than 1% are indigenous. How could anyone care about these numbers? Are they productive? Are the newspapers good that they actually publish? Is the company profitable? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? You won't even see that mentioned in this article. because they're focused on completely absurd things. In its 2022 inclusion report, Gannett highlighted progress towards its diversity goals, saying that more than 16% of its employees at the director level or higher were people of color, up from 2.3% from the previous year. Quote, people of color and women in leadership continues to grow at a faster pace than overall representation, the report said. This progress came at a cost to white employees, the lawsuit claims. Management directed leaders to exclude white candidates as the company prioritized race over job performance and other professional qualifications, according to the complaint. Gannett also tethered executive performance to success with diversity goals, the complaint states. Quote, the implementation of this policy resulted in the termination of numerous well-qualified workers based purely on their non-minority status, the complaint states. And they paid their executives to do this to their employees with bonuses. Gannett's diversity efforts predate the commitments the company made after George Floyd's death, according to Thomas, the attorney representing the former Gannett employees. Quote, what you see happening is Gannett seeing the George Floyd situation and saying, hey, we do this stuff already, let's go public with it, Thomas said. The plaintiffs are asking Gannett to put an end to the 2020 policy and to award them lost pay, benefits, and other monetary damages. In nearly 3 decades as an employment attorney, Thomas said he has never before represented a white person claiming racial discrimination. But he felt compelled to take the case, he said, after hearing how Gannett tried to meet diversity targets. Quote, this country needs racial diversity, Thomas said. But if companies go about doing it this way, it's going to kill it. The circumstances around Bradley's first firing caught Thomas's attention when a reporter at the Democrat and Chronicle sent Thomas screenshots from a text exchange she'd had with the paper's executive editor, Michael Killian. The reporter had questioned Gannett's diversity efforts involving Asian Americans. Killian defended his management record by replying that he had hired the first Asian American city editor in Utica decades earlier and that he had once had an Asian American lieutenant. And Killian added, he, quote, laid off Steve Bradley, that's this guy, the guy who's suing, instead of one of Bradley's former colleagues on the sports staff who is Asian American. While another white male sports staffer was laid off alongside Bradley, the complaint states that, quote, no non-minority members of the sports writing staff were terminated during this time period. Any news site can work harder at inclusion, but we have done our best at a time of constant cuts, the message from Killian concluded. Killian did not respond to requests for comment, and I'm sure you can see why he wouldn't respond. Thomas soon encountered other ex-Gannett staffers who alleged the company had discriminated against white employees in its quest to meet diversity goals. Plaintiff Stephen Crane, a former editor of the Herald Times in Bloomington, Indiana, alleges he was told to consider only minority candidates for open positions. Crane claims he had to rescind an offer to a white male candidate despite the fact that he tried but couldn't find enough qualified minority applicants, the lawsuit says. Crane alleges he faced retaliation for raising concerns about how Gannett was going about meeting diversity targets. He then resigned in 2021. Another plaintiff, Noah Hines, found himself working alone in summer 2021 when the only other sports staffer quit just 2 months after Hiles joined the Beaver County Times. Hiles offered to use his contacts to help fill the opening and, quote, was informed that the position needed to be filled by a minority, the complaint states. Hiles helped find a minority candidate who eventually was hired. Then Hines learned the employee, who he was now overseeing, was making 17% more than he was. Frustrated, Hiles approached management about a raise, but was told that Gannett paid the new employee more to ensure they satisfied their racial quota and that he would accept the position, according to the complaint. Although Bradley was laid off before Gannett set its post-George Floyd diversity targets, he believes these goals cost him the chance to return to a newsroom. In early 2021, Bradley applied to become executive editor overseeing Gannett Newsroom in New York's Mohawk Valley. He made it through multiple rounds of interviews and was told in February 2021 that he was a finalist for the job, along with one other white male candidate, according to the complaint. Then he stopped hearing from Gannett. A month later, Bradley learned that a new candidate had emerged. The job went to Sheila Raymond, a former reporter and community engagement editor, and the first black person to hold the position. In an interview with Buffalo State University last year, Rayanne said her editor had approached her about the role asking if she'd like to run her own newsroom. Rayam is now the executive editor of the Buffalo News. Rayam also declined to comment. In Rayam, Bradley said he saw someone with less newsroom management experience who hadn't been interested in the job and who was recruited by Gannett executives over more qualified white candidates. But he said he takes issue with Gannett, not Rayam or others the company opted to keep or promote. Quote, "This is a company that if the government or another business were doing what they were doing, they'd have their watchdog reporter call over to them. If you're going to hold the rest of the world to a standard, you should live up to that standard yourself." After the initial phone call with Thomas, Bradley said he felt shocked and overwhelmed. He went for a long walk, rethinking the end of his time at Gannett. He then spent months debating whether to go ahead with the lawsuit. Ultimately, Bradley said he decided he had to speak out about his experience. Quote, "Racism is racism and right is right and wrong is wrong," Bradley said. "Decisions should be based on the quality of a candidate and the quality of performance and not protected class issues." That's really what it all comes down to. And Steve Bradley isn't the only one. From Bloomberg Law, NASCAR accused of bias against white men in diversity efforts. NASCAR and a racing team the organization supports to develop female and minority drivers are the latest targets of a conservative legal group's offensive against corporate diversity initiatives. America First Legal again taking the bull by the horns and getting after it. Stephen Miller's organization put in a complaint with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to investigate NASCAR and Rev Racing for, quote, "illegal discrimination against white male Americans." Over the past year, AFL has accused more than a dozen companies, including Morgan Stanley, Major League Baseball, McDonald's, and Starbucks, of having discriminatory diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. The EEOC has yet to publicly respond to the group's request, and there have been a lot of requests, and I've emailed them. I haven't heard back from AFL either. I'm curious to see what the status of these complaints are. The complaints potentially put the Civil Rights Agency in the difficult position of probing corporate policies aimed at reducing workplace discrimination. The group claimed that NASCAR and Rev Racing's DEI programs, including its, quote, "diversity driver development program," diversity pit crew development program, and the NASCAR diversity internship program, violate Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination based on race and sex. These programs previously specified that they were intended for women and ethnic minorities, but were updated on September 1st to say that they sought applicants of, quote, "diverse backgrounds and experiences," according to the AFL's letter to the EEOC. Despite the language change, AFL, America First Legal, claimed that NASCAR and Rev Racing are continuing to carry out unlawful hiring practices, quote, "under the cloak of a diverse backgrounds and experiences rebranding." A request for comment to NASCAR from Bloomberg Law got absolutely no reply, and I'm sure you know why they didn't reply. They know what they're doing is wrong. They know it's not legally defensible, and it isn't something that's supposed to be happening in the United States of America. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.